Hi, my name is Jane Bregoli. Today I'm going to show you how to do a painting in watercolor pencil. I'm using Strathmore 400 series watercolor paper taped on a board. You can tape your paper to any flat surface. It could be on wood, it could be on foam core. This is Homosoap board, which I found at Home Depot. This board is good because you can tape your paper on it or you can staple your paper on it. So I'm looking at the flower setup that I have. I've picked these from my garden, and I have done a preliminary sketch in pencil. And what you want to look for when you're sketching your picture out is the direction that the flowers are going in. Some flowers are bending down toward the ground. Some are off to the side. Some will be facing you. When you're sketching, you want to look at the direction that the flowers are going in. The flowers are all not facing you. When people start out drawing flowers, they think of a traditional flower setup in that the flowers, the middle of the flowers, are circles. Van Gogh's flowers are facing in different directions. This flower is facing toward the table. That flower is bent, facing over to the left. These up here and those down there have lost their leaves, and there are very few. There are only 1, 2 sunflowers that are facing you. That one is facing up toward the right-hand corner, and that one is bending down. One of the reasons that Van Gogh is such a good painter is that he looks to see how things are individual, so that each one of these sunflowers is different. He's looking at the differences of all the flowers, that some have lost their petals and some are facing different directions. The only ones that are round in the circle are the ones that are facing you. So Vincent van Gogh moved to Arles, France. He moved into a yellow house. He has painted pictures of the yellow house, which you can see in some of his books. He also lived near a sunflower field. He would paint outside, he'd paint the sunflowers outside, but when the weather was not cooperating, he would pick the sunflowers, bring them in his room, and paint the sunflowers in a still life vase. He painted approximately 10 paintings of sunflowers. Each one is a little bit different, and a lot of times he signed his name on the pot itself. And today, I'm inspired by Vincent van Gogh's paintings to do a summer flower painting. So I see that this flower here is pointing up to the left-hand corner, and I'm looking at the dark parts of the flowers to see the shapes that they're in. So that shape is more of a rectangular shape. This one here is a flattened oval. This one here is more of a round shape. It's facing me. And this flower is wilted, it's facing down toward the ground. So I'm basically looking at the middle shapes first, the directions second, and the way that the petals are facing. Each petal, as Vincent van Gogh knew, each petal has this different shape. All the petals are not exactly the same. I'm going to go around, I'm going to do the background first in watercolor pencil. I'm going around the edge and trying to make my pencil lines smooth. So at this point, a good underdrawing is really important so that you can follow it. The paper I'm using is a Strathmore 400 series watercolor paper, and these are Crayola watercolor pencils. This is a ultramarine blue color. I'm using a number 6 Royal Aquilon brush, a filbert brush. So I'm going to use the tip of the brush to go along the edge of each petal. When you're painting, it's important to pay attention to the tip of the brush. Sometimes people, when they're starting out, they just figure they're just going to paint along without paying attention to the tip of the brush, but the tip of the brush is how you're going to make your painting look the way that you want it to look accurately. You're going to keep in the lines if you did make lines. If you want the paint to fade out toward the edges here, all you do is add more water. Where you have less water, the colored pencil will be more brilliant or darker. So the more water you add, it'll be lighter. The less water you add will make it darker. Okay, I'm done with the blue. Making sure I get all the blue off of my brush. So I'm dipping my brush into the water. I'm not swishing it around to make the water blue. I still have clean water, which is important because now I'm going to use yellow. And I'm using a light yellow. This is a Crayola. So I am going around the dry parts. It doesn't take long for this to dry. Sometimes you can see the lines beneath the water, beneath the paint. Because you can see the lines sometimes, you want to draw in the direction that the petals are going. So I am making the long lines in the same direction as the petals. So I'm making these lines more horizontally than vertically in longer strokes. So you really have to look closely at the flower to see how it's made. You have to look at the structure of the flower, almost like a scientist. So if the petal is moving off to the right, I'm going to make my lines go in the same direction. If the petal is off to the left, then I'll make my lines go off to the left. So I've done all the petals in yellow in the direction that they're facing. Now I'm going to go right over this with a darker color. I'm going to choose some orange. When you paint this, the yellow and the orange will blend together. So now I see that there is orange all around the middle of these. Some have a darker color, like a darker brown. In that case, I'll put the darker brown right over the orange so that they will all blend together when water activates the color. So I'm going from light to dark. That's generally how you want to paint in watercolor. You want to go from light to dark. And if you can possibly start out with the yellow, that is a good thing. Also, it will make your water stay cleaner, because you want to keep your water as clean as long as possible. You don't want to have to keep getting up to change your water. So I'm starting from the bottom of the petal and working my way up to the orange. So the blue in the background has dried and the yellow is not dissolving into the blue. If you didn't wait for your background to dry, then the yellow and the blue would mix together. And in this case, that's not what I want. In some cases, that's perfectly fine, depending upon the painting you're doing. After the paint is dried, if you want to make something darker, just go over it, do a second layer of watercolor pencil. And once you activate the colored pencil again, it will be darker where you want it to be. So I'm touching it up in a few spots before I put the brown on. I'm putting a little bit more orange on there. Okay. All the brown lines are radiating from the middle of the flower. And when you pay attention to the right direction that they're going in, it will make the flower look more real, more lifelike. So right now I'm using a Crayola brown watercolor pencil. Because I want the middle of the flowers to be darker, I'm going over again, over the first layer of brown to make it darker. And in this case, it's okay if the paper is still a little bit wet, because it will pick up the brown even more and make it even darker. And I'm going to use a little bit of black also. Because I really want a contrast between the petals and the insides of the flower. There's a nice light and dark contrast here that will make your painting pop more and be more brilliant and expressive. So the black is going right over the brown. And again, I'm paying attention to what direction the flowers are facing. Either off to the side or down to the ground. When you have flowers in front of you to paint from, one of the advantages is that you can really move the flowers around to see parts that you can't see in a photograph. Because you can't see different sides of a photograph, you just see it straight on. But with 3D things that you're painting from, you can move them around to see what it really looks like on the other side. Now I'm moving on to green. So I'm starting out with the light green. This is a yellow green from Crayola. And I will go over with a darker green later, but just as it's important to pay attention to what direction the flowers are going in, it's important to pay attention to the leaves, what shape they are. A lot of the leaves are folded, some of the stems are bent. So you want to pay attention to the different directions of the leaves and the stems just as much as the flowers. I can't see the inside of this flower, only the outside of it. But you know the inside of the flowers here are dark brown, just like the other three that you can see the outside, you can see the inside of. So I'm not pressing down hard with my watercolor pencil right now. I'm just doing this lightly. Okay, now I'm taking my darker green and I'm looking for spaces that are in the shadow and just leaving the lighter green just the way that I had done it in the first place. So I'm not putting darker green over the lighter green in those spots. So I want to leave some highlights. So at this point, you're going to draw in the darker parts right over the lighter parts, and you're making shadows by using your darker green and your light green. Just as you paid attention to how the petals and the flowers are, they're all different. The leaves are all different too. They're all facing different directions. And you're going to use the lines that you draw to emphasize the direction that the leaves are going in. So for the pot, I'm using a Derwent Inktense leaf green because the pot is a more of a grayer green than the leaves themselves. And I'm going to pay attention to the shape of the bowl, the roundness of it. So I'm making my lines follow the shape. So in this instance, I'm not going to color straight up and down. I will color following the shape of the bowl. And I'm going to pay particular attention to the highlights from the lights above and the lights in back in the window. So I'm going to outline where I see the highlights. That way I'll make sure I'm not going to paint into the highlights. I'll make sure I save those spots and leave them white. Because if I don't outline them right now, I know that I'll forget when I get to that area. So by outlining them, you're going to automatically stop when you get to that spot. And then hopefully you'll remember what that is. It's a highlight. Okay, So the highlights are following the shape of the bowl. Because this is a larger area to cover, I'm using a larger brush. This is a number 10 filbert brush. Filbert brushes are rounder at the top, and you can also use a nice point. You can get a nice point with the filbert brushes. Okay, I'm up to that highlight. Now I remember that I have to stop painting at that area. I want the white of the paper to be the highlight. Because when you paint with watercolor pencils or any watercolor, it's difficult to add white. You need to use the white of the paper in order to get a brilliant white. I'm going to add a little bit of the leaf green to the leaves. Now that these have dried, I just want to make it, just emphasize the lines in the leaves just a little bit more and emphasize the stems to make them a little bit darker in certain places. That darker leaf green color will blend right in to the other colors that I put on before, the yellow green and the regular green color. It all blends together when it's activated with water. So watercolor pencil is very versatile. You can use it in many different ways. If I want the background to be a little bit lighter, I can add more water, and I can lift off some of the blue to make that bit lighter. So I'm going to add a little bit of water here. Put my paper towel on there. And so that you can see that I've put more blue on the paper towel and less on the background. So, and that way you can change the backgrounds of watercolor or watercolor pencil. And there you have it. I hope this was helpful to you. Perhaps you'll be inspired by doing some flowers from your own garden. Feel free to visit me at my website at www.janebregoli.com. Happy painting!